So I want you to picture the interior of a Los Angeles sound booth. We're in the late 1990s here.
Right, just a tiny, isolated room.
Exactly. The room is dead quiet, lined with that thick, that gray acoustic foam that just swallows every single echo. And inside, a comedian steps up to the microphone.
But he isn't doing what you'd expect him to do.
No, not at all. He isn't doing his usual routine. He's not, he isn't screaming at the top of his lungs with the veins in his neck bulging.
Yeah, he's not sweating through a tight suit or anything.
Right. He isn't crashing his entire body weight through a breakaway coffee table while a live studio audience just completely roars.
Which is what everyone knew him for.
Exactly. Instead, he's speaking really softly. He's deliberately pacing his breath. He's voicing this humble, kind of bumbling, innocent, and deeply misunderstood ogre.
An ogre who lives in a swamp.
Yeah, a character who just wants to be left alone, but secretly, desperately craves connection and love. And now, imagine the shock when you realize that gentle, vulnerable voice belonged to a man known to the entire world as just this chaotic, screaming tornado of physical destruction.
It's still hard to wrap my head around, honestly.
I mean, we were talking about Chris Farley. He was the original voice of Shrek.
It really is a profound image to hold in your mind, especially when you consider, the massive cultural footprint he left behind.
Oh, totally.
Because the contrast between that quiet booth and the explosive stage is just striking. And I think it reveals a real fracture in how we consume entertainment.
How do you mean?
Well, on screen, he was always framed as this unstoppable, blunt force object, right? A guy who essentially weaponized his own physical mass to just extract laughs from the audience.
Right, like a human wrecking ball.
Exactly. But in that isolated recording booth, trying to capture the essence of a sweet, isolated, animated character, a completely different human being emerges. I mean, society has this deeply ingrained habit of placing entertainers into these rigidly defined boxes.
We really do. We want the loud guy to just stay the loud guy forever.
Yeah, we demand it. We demand that the funny loud guy remains the funny loud guy indefinitely. We strip away their dimensions because, frankly, it makes them easier to consume. But a human life, particularly one fueled by that level of raw artistic energy, is always infinitely more complex than a 2-minute sketch.
And that complexity is the absolute core of our mission today on this deep dive.
We got a lot of ground to cover.
We really do. We are pulling from this massive stack of sources today, authorized biographies, behind-the-scenes production accounts, Hollywood histories, and personal memoirs from his contemporaries. The goal here is to construct a really comprehensive, story-driven portrait of Christopher Crosby Farley.
Right, pushing way past the highlight reel.
Exactly. I mean, we will certainly examine the mechanics of his most famous performances, but we have to peel back the layers of the quote-unquote fat guy in a little coat.
Which is so much harder than it sounds.
Yeah. We want to look at the deeply religious kid from Wisconsin, the highly disciplined college athlete, the fiercely loyal friend, and, ultimately, the tragic figure who found himself completely trapped in the crushing machinery of the entertainment industry.
Trapped and unable to escape the shadows of his own comedic idols.
Right.
And honestly, you really cannot discuss his life without immediately acknowledging the heaviest of those shadows.
John Belushi.
Yeah. The eerie, undeniable, and deeply tragic parallels between Chris Farley and his absolute idol, John Belushi. I mean, the trajectory of their careers, the specific flavor of their kinetic, high-wire comedic talents.
It's almost unsettling when you lay it all out.
It is their agonizing public struggles with substance abuse and, sadly, the exact manner and age of their deaths. It casts this melancholic tone over any retrospective of his work.
Because you're always watching him through the lens of knowing what is coming.
Exactly. But we also have to recognize the joy.
Oh, the sheer, unadulterated joy he transmitted to millions of people was just profound.
It requires a really delicate balance,
Yeah.
to examine the darkness without letting it completely extinguish the incredible light he brought to the stage.
So let's start where the light first appeared, because his origins completely subvert that classic myth of the starving, tortured artist.
Oh, entirely.
Yeah, if your only exposure to him is through those wild, disheveled television characters, his actual background is going to completely shatter your assumptions.
People always assume he had it rough.
Right. But Christopher Crosby Farley was born on February 15th, 1964, in Madison, Wisconsin. And he didn't grow up scraping by in a tiny apartment. He grew up in a really affluent, highly desirable neighborhood called Maple Bluff.
A very prominent Irish-American family.
Yeah, very prosperous.
Yeah.
His father, Thomas John Farley Sr., owned the Scotch Oil Company. His mother, Mary Ann, was a homemaker who managed this bustling household of 5 children.
Tom Jr., Kevin, John, Barbara, and Chris.
Yep, you have this massive, successful, highly structured Midwestern family dynamic. And the business acumen in that bloodline is actually staggering when you look at it.
Wait until you hear who his cousin is.
Right. His cousin, Jim Farley, is currently the CEO of the Ford Motor Company.
Which is just wild to think about.
It's crazy. You don't usually associate the origins of chaotic slapstick comedy with the upper echelons of corporate American royalty.
It completely disrupts the narrative. He was raised with comfort, security, and a very clear set of societal expectations.
And a massive pillar of that structured environment was the family's devotion to the Catholic faith.
That's a huge part of who he was.
He attended parochial schools in Madison, culminating at Edgewood High School of the Sacred Heart. And when we look at the accounts from people who knew him later in life, like Joel Murray.
From the Chicago days, right?
Yeah, who worked with him in Chicago. Murray points out that Farley's Catholicism wasn't just like a cultural background detail. It was an active daily practice.
He would consistently make it to Mass.
Yes. Regardless of what had happened the night before, he was at Mass.
Which feels like a massive internal contradiction, doesn't it?
It really does. You have this guy who, later on, is famous for the most profane, boundary-pushing, destructive behavior imaginable in New York City, yet he feels this inescapable obligation to sit in a pew on Sunday morning.
It's almost like he was constantly seeking an arena for absolution.
Wow, yeah.
Like he needed the structure of the church to counteract the total lack of structure in his comedic persona.
That is a really astute way to look at it. That tension between sin and forgiveness, between the sacred and the profane, it's a classic driver of artistic angst.
He was raised in a system that clearly defines right and wrong, yet his chosen profession literally rewarded him for crossing every possible line.
And alongside that religious structure, he had this very traditional, wholesome Midwestern upbringing. He spent his childhood summers at Red Arrow Camp near Minocqua, Wisconsin.
And he loved it so much he eventually became a counselor there.
I can't even fathom the chaotic joy of having a 19-year-old Chris Farley as your summer camp counselor.
Oh my gosh, the energy.
The sheer volume of energy he must have injected into a group of kids. But then, the timeline moves forward. He attends Marquette University, graduating in 1986 with a double major in communications and theater.
And here is the detail hidden in his college years that fundamentally changes how we have to analyze his physical comedy.
The rugby.
Yes. At Marquette, he was a really dedicated rugby player.
Which is the crucial key to unlocking how his comedy actually functioned mechanically.
Absolutely. Society has a terrible habit of looking at physical comedians, particularly those who are overweight, and assuming their humor is born entirely of clumsiness.
Right, like, oh, look, a big guy tripped.
Exactly. The assumption is that the laugh comes from a big man losing his balance. But rugby is a sport defined by intense discipline, brutal physicality, and absolute spatial awareness.
You literally cannot survive on a rugby pitch if you do not understand momentum, center of gravity, and how to absorb kinetic energy.
So instead of looking at him as a clumsy guy stumbling around, we really need to view him almost like a highly calibrated crash test dummy.
With like an internal gyroscope.
Yes. To hurl a 250 to 300-pound body over a sofa, twist in midair, and land on a breakaway table without snapping your own neck requires elite athletic precision.
So was he consciously utilizing that sports training when he was developing his stage persona?
Oh, absolutely. The biomechanics of his pratfalls are a masterclass in weight distribution.
Really?
Yeah, when you watch a rugby player go into a tackle or take a hit, they drop their center of gravity, they roll through the impact, and they distribute the force across the larger muscle groups of the shoulders and back.
Rather than taking it on the spine or the joints.
Precisely. Farley did the exact same thing on stage. The falls were chaotic to the untrained eye, but they were deeply choreographed. The frantic dancing, the crashing through scenery, it had a rhythm.
So the athletic discipline he forged on the rugby pitch at Marquette didn't vanish when he graduated.
No, it just mutated. It gave him the physical armor necessary to throw his entire being into a punchline without immediately destroying his body.
But initially, he didn't run straight to the stage, right? He graduates in 1986, and he does what the good, dutiful son in an affluent family is supposed to do.
He goes to work for his dad.
Yeah. He puts on a tie and goes to work at the Scotch Oil Company.
You can practically feel the claustrophobia of that situation.
Oh, totally. You have this human kinetic engine sitting at a desk looking at spreadsheets or managing oil accounts. The pressure must have been building instantly.
It doesn't take long before he seeks an outlet.
No. He starts taking classes at the Arc Improv Theater in Madison, and that local stage acts as the pressure valve, but it also lights the fuse that shoots him straight toward the epicenter of Midwestern comedy.
Chicago.
Yes, Chicago.
Relocating to Chicago is where the raw material of his personality is really forged into an actual skill set. He begins at the Improv Olympic.
The legendary training ground created by Del Close and Charna Halpern.
Right, and the philosophy there is all about long-form improvisation, building connections, and the sacred rule of yes and.
And from there, his undeniable talent propels him to the absolute summit of the Chicago scene.
The Second City Theater.
Yeah. Second City is not just a comedy club, it is an institution. It's a rigorous academy that takes kinetic, unshaped comedic instinct and forces it into a structured, repeatable, collaborative format.
And the history of that specific era at Second City is mind-boggling when you look at who is in the building.
Our stack of sources highlights a piece of trivia that honestly sounds made up.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
Chris Farley started at Second City on the exact same day as Stephen Colbert.
It's just wild.
I want you to visualize that orientation day.
Yep.
Because Stephen Colbert, a man whose entire comedic framework is built on high-status, razor-sharp intellectual irony.
His comedy lives entirely from the neck up.
Exactly. And standing next to him is Chris Farley, a man whose comedy lives from the neck down a hurricane of sweat, physical desperation, and slapstick.
Two entirely different species of performer gestating in the exact same incubator.
It perfectly illustrates the diverse ecosystem Second City was capable of sustaining.
Yeah, the methodology there requires you to be generous to your scene partner. Colbert's intellectual rigidity provided a perfect wall for Farley's emotional explosions to bounce off of.
And Farley began in the touring company, right? Which is an incredibly grueling life.
Oh, it's brutal. You were traveling in vans, performing in secondary markets, standing in front of crowds that might be hostile or just exhausted.
And you have to learn how to command a room within 30 seconds.
Which he mastered. By 1989, he was elevated to the main stage in Chicago. He became a featured cast member in 3 distinct revues with wonderfully absurd titles like The Gods Must Be Lazy.
I love that one.
It was 30 years ago today, and flag smoking permitted in lobby only or Sensorama.
But here is a fascinating detour in the timeline. While he is building this legendary reputation on the Chicago stage, he almost takes a completely different path.
The Home Alone audition.
Yes. He auditions for a bit part in a movie being directed by Chris Columbus. The role is the mall Santa, the guy who has to interact with a young Macaulay Culkin. But Chris Columbus rejects him. He didn't get the part.
That audition tape, or even just the concept of it, is a massive sliding doors moment in Hollywood history.
Oh, huge.
You have to analyze what a director like Chris Columbus is looking for in a family comedy. He wants a character actor who can hit a mark, deliver a slightly gruff but ultimately warm line, and blend into the background of the scene.
And Farley didn't know how to blend.
Not at all. His energy was terrifyingly large. For a traditional filmmaker, that level of intensity in a minor role threatens to unbalance the entire movie.
It makes you wonder what would have happened if he had managed to dial it down just enough to get the part. I mean, Home Alone becomes a global juggernaut.
Right.
If Farley is in it, does he get sucked into the Hollywood machine as a quirky character actor, playing wacky neighbors and security guards for the next decade?
Or does missing out on that mall Santa role actually save his career?
Yeah, keeping him anchored to the stage long enough to fully develop his voice before New York came calling.
I believe it absolutely saved his artistic development. Second City was a laboratory. If he had been plucked out of that laboratory too early to do 5 lines in a studio comedy, he might never have learned how to construct a complete 3-dimensional character.
He needed the crucible of the live stage.
He really did. And he dominated that stage so thoroughly that the industry could no longer ignore him. Word of his performances began to ripple out of Chicago, eventually reaching the desk of Lorne Michaels in New York City.
Which sets the stage for 1990 and a seismic shift in the cultural landscape of late-night television.
The 1990 cast additions to Saturday Night Live represented a hostile takeover of comedy.
Really, it was. The late 1980s SNL had been a bit more cerebral, a bit more polished, and suddenly Lorne Michaels injects this raw, unfiltered energy into the bloodstream of the show.
Chris Farley is announced as a new cast member alongside Chris Rock.
And they form the nucleus of what would quickly be dubbed the Bad Boys of SNL.
A crew that included Farley, Rock, Adam Sandler, Tim Meadows, Rob Schneider, and David Spade.
Just imagine the psychological pressure cooker of those writers'
That
rooms.
had to be intense.
You have half a dozen singular, deeply ambitious comedic savants, all hungry for validation, fighting tooth and nail for 3 minutes of airtime on a live national broadcast.
The internal competition must have been staggering. To differentiate yourself in a room containing the acerbic wit of David Spade, the musical absurdity of Adam Sandler, and the sharp observational genius of Chris Rock, you had to offer something no one else could.
And Farley's strategy was extreme sacrifice.
Yeah, he didn't just outright them. He offered his literal flesh and blood to the audience. He threw himself into the set pieces with a ferocity that demanded the camera stay on him.
And it produced some of the most enduring imagery in television history. We could look at his diverse range, like the Gap Girls, where he's sitting in the food court in full drag with Sandler and Spade, perfectly capturing the gossipy cadence of a suburban teenager.
Or The Lunch Lady, immortalized in Sandler's song, where Farley brings this strange, tragic dignity to a cafeteria worker.
Yeah, and Bennett Brower.
Oh, the Weekend Update commentator.
Sweating profusely, aggressively, using air quotes, to list his own repulsive hygienic failures. And his celebrity impressions were wildly popular too, ranging from Meatloaf to Jerry Garcia to a shockingly funny Newt Gingrich.
But to truly understand his genius, we have to deconstruct his absolute masterpiece.
The motivational speaker.
The man who lives in a van down by the river.
We have to dissect Matt Foley.
Matt Foley is not merely a sketch character. It is a masterwork of comedic architecture. And understanding its foundation requires us to look back at Chicago.
Because it wasn't created at SNL, right?
No, the character wasn't birthed in the high-stress environment of Studio 8H. It was carefully built by Bob Odenkirk and Farley when they were working together at Second City.
Wow.
Odenkirk recognized that Farley had a specific frequency of manic, desperate energy, and they needed a vessel to contain it.
And the construction of Matt Foley is brilliant because it is assembled entirely from pieces of Farley's real life.
Starting with the name.
Right. First, the name. He named this chaotic, thrice-divorced, coffee-addicted failure after his real-life friend, Matt Foley.
Who actually became a Catholic priest in Illinois.
Yeah. Originally, when they did the sketch in Chicago, Farley would just plug in the name of whoever he knew in the audience that night. But when the real Matt Foley attended a show, Chris used his name, and the juxtaposition of this holy, serene man's name being attached to this screaming lunatic just clicked.
He refused to ever change it again.
Never changed it.
The name provides a grounding wire of reality. But the physicality of Matt Foley, that is where the alchemy happens. We discussed his rugby background earlier. Notice the strange, stilted, aggressive way Matt Foley moves around the living room.
Those jerky, sudden shifts in balance.
Exactly. Farley directly lifted those movements from the defensive stances of his college rugby teammates.
That makes so much sense. And the constant, aggressive hitching up of the belt, and those deep, wide squats he does while screaming at David Spade and Christina Applegate. Stolen. He stole that exact physical tick from his high school football coach, who used to drop into that stance to deliver terrifying locker room pep talks.
Then you add the final ingredient.
The voice.
That booming, out-of-breath, slightly terrifying bellow that seems to literally shake the walls of the set. Farley admitted that the cadence and the volume were a direct imitation of his own father's voice when he was truly angry.
When you synthesize those elements, the name of a Catholic priest, the aggressive stance of a rugby player, the squat of an intense football coach, and the terrifying bellow of an angry father, you don't just have a funny costume.
You have a fully realized, deeply layered human being built from the psychological fragments of his Midwestern upbringing.
It works because the desperation of Matt Foley is completely sincere.
It really is brilliant, deeply personal art disguised as slapstick. And it sits right alongside another sketch that completely defined his career, for better and for worse.
The Chippendales audition.
It's Farley and Patrick Swayze, both shirtless, performing a highly choreographed, seductive dance routine in front of a panel of judges.
Now, it is very easy to look at that sketch through a cynical lens. You can argue the core premise of the joke is just, look at this incredibly overweight man trying to be sexy next to the star of Dirty Dancing.
And that is exactly how the network and the broader audience initially digested it. The surface-level visual gag relies entirely on body shape. It plays into the history of physical comedy that Farley idolized figures like Curly Howard of the Three Stooges or the silent film star Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle.
Right.
The premise invites the audience to laugh at him, but that is not why the sketch has endured, and it is not why it is brilliant.
Right, because when you actually watch the performance, the joke completely inverts itself.
Yes, it does.
He isn't stumbling. He isn't making a mockery of the routine. He is executing complex choreography with a phenomenal sense of rhythm and agility.
The comedy is derived from his absolute unironic confidence.
Yeah. He is looking at Patrick Swayze not with self-deprecation, but with a fierce competitive belief that he is the superior dancer.
He commits so totally to the reality of the scene that he forces the audience to respect his physical prowess, even while they are laughing.
Total commitment was his signature, but that level of output comes with a terrifying cost.
You cannot run a human body and mind at that extreme voltage for the duration of a live broadcast and then simply switch it off when the director yells cut.
No. The adrenaline, the desperate need for the validation of the laugh, it began to bleed heavily into his reality. The boundary between Chris Farley the person and Chris Farley the performer completely dissolved.
And that brings us to the dark, chaotic reality behind the scenes at 30 Rockefeller Plaza.
The environment at SNL is notoriously grueling, fueled by late nights, massive egos, and constant anxiety. But Farley turned the offices into his own personal, non-stop performance art piece.
And the anecdotes from this era are wild, but when you look closely, they are deeply harrowing.
They really are. He and Adam Sandler would make late-night prank phone calls from the writers' offices. Sandler would put on the voice of an elderly woman, and Farley would literally fart into the receiver.
Which is juvenile, sure, but it rapidly escalated beyond juvenile pranks.
Oh, way beyond. He was known for hanging out of moving limousine windows in Manhattan to moon-passing cars. He once defecated out of a 17th floor window at Rockefeller Center.
Unbelievable.
He would frequently strip completely naked and sprint through the hallways doing unhinged impressions, including the serial killer Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs, which was a massive cultural touchstone at the time.
Chris Rock gave a famously blunt quote about this era, noting that he probably saw Chris Farley's genitals more often than Farley's own girlfriend did.
It is critical that we don't just laugh these stories off as the wacky antics of a famous fraternity brother.
No, because when you analyze the psychology of a man defecating out of a skyscraper or running naked through a professional office building, you are looking at someone who has completely lost their internal compass.
This is the behavior of a man utterly addicted to the immediate gratification of a shocked laugh.
It is an obliteration of social boundaries. He was trapped in a cycle where the only way he knew how to interact with the world was by destroying his own dignity for their amusement. It's a mechanism of defense, and it's a symptom of a profound internal void.
It's the tragedy of the clown. If he stops performing, he has to sit quietly with his own thoughts, and clearly, that was a terrifying prospect for him.
This complete inability to turn off the engine leads directly into his severe escalating abuse of drugs and alcohol.
He was trying to chemically replicate the high of the live stage.
Or perhaps chemically numb the exhaustion of the performance. But the institution of Saturday Night Live couldn't endlessly absorb that level of chaos. The network, the producers, the lawyers, they all started pushing back.
Because Lorne Michaels, who had already lived through the trauma of watching John Belushi succumb to the exact same demons, had zero tolerance for it.
Michaels threatened to fire him permanently. His management team at Brillstein Gray Entertainment intervened constantly.
And the statistics regarding his attempts at recovery are heartbreaking. He was sent to rehabilitation facilities for his weight and his substance abuse an astonishing 17 times over the final years of his life.
Think about the physical and emotional whiplash of 17 rehab stints.
Right. You go away, you suffer the agony of detoxification, you find a moment of clarity and physical health.
And then you are immediately thrust back into the toxic, high-pressure environment of live television and Hollywood enablers.
It is an impossible cycle to break. Ultimately, the chaos became unmanageable for the network. In 1995, in a move that shocked the industry, NBC fired both Chris Farley and Adam Sandler from Saturday Night Live.
Firing the two most popular stars on your roster is a drastic measure, but it speaks to the severity of the behind-the-scenes reality. However, this dismissal forced a massive necessary pivot in his career.
The weekly immediate outlet of television was gone.
Yeah, he had to transition into the grueling, high-stakes world of carrying feature films.
He wasn't entirely untested in the movie business, though. During his time at SNL, he had been honing his screen presence with a series of brilliant scene-stealing cameos.
He played the hyper-intense security guard in Wayne's World and returned for Wayne's World 2.
Right, he popped up in Coneheads, played Officer Wilson in Airheads, and delivered an uncredited legendary performance as the enraged, red-faced bus driver who steals the children's lunches in Adam Sandler's Billy Madison.
He even crossed over into MTV culture, appearing in the music video for the Red Hot Chili Peppers' Soul to Squeeze.
But dropping into a movie for one day to film a hilarious 3-minute cameo is vastly different from being the leading man whose face is on the movie poster.
But he proved he was capable of carrying that weight with his first major starring vehicle, 1995's Tommy Boy.
What a classic.
The film paired him with his SNL castmate and closest confidant, David Spade. It was a massive commercial success, pulling in over $32 million at the domestic box office.
And more importantly, it found an eternal life on home video, becoming a defining comedy of the 1990s.
The industry recognized their chemistry immediately, awarding them the MTV Movie Award for Best On-Screen Duo.
We have to analyze the architecture of the Farley and Spade dynamic. Why does it work so perfectly on film?
Well, it isn't just because they were friends. They tapped into a fundamental comedic formula and executed it flawlessly.
They perfectly embodied the classic comedy archetype of the chaotic, emotional klutz paired with the rigid, cynical straight man.
You see echoes of Laurel and Hardy, or Martin and Lewis. Farley is the hyperactive, well-meaning, emotionally volatile engine of destruction. Spade is the physically unimposing, deeply sarcastic, deadpan observer.
Because their personalities are in total opposition, every single interaction in the script has built-in friction. Spade's total lack of reaction magnifies the absurdity of Farley's physical explosions.
But what elevated Tommy Boy beyond a simple gag delivery system was the genuine fraternal affection underneath the insults. The audience could feel that they actually loved each other, which gave the film an emotional core that really resonated.
Tommy Boy was a triumph, but in Hollywood, a triumph instantly transforms you from a human being into a financial asset.
Yeah, it cemented him as a bankable movie star, but it also painted a massive target on his back.
Studio executives saw the box office returns and immediately demanded more. They weren't interested in his artistic growth. They were hungry for a quick cash-in.
And this predatory demand led directly to the disastrous production of his next film, which triggered a horrific personal downfall.
The studio mandated an immediate follow-up to recapture the Tommy Boy revenue stream.
The project they forced upon him was called Black Sheep.
And the desperation to get the film into theaters was so intense that the studio greenlit the production when they only had 60 pages of a script.
60 pages is barely a novella, let alone a feature-length film script.
Imagine the immense psychological pressure that places on the performers. You are the star of a multi-million-dollar studio comedy. The crew is waiting, the cameras are rolling, and the blueprint for the movie doesn't even exist yet.
You are expected to just invent the humor on the spot to save the studio's investment.
And Farley was completely aware that this situation was a disaster. He was deeply dissatisfied with the project. He knew the art was being compromised for commerce.
The stress of that realization that the Hollywood machine was perfectly willing to squeeze him dry and prioritize quarterly earnings over his artistic integrity and mental health, it shattered his fragile sobriety.
On the night of the film's premiere, the pressure finally broke him, and he suffered a severe relapse.
When you contextualize that relapse within the broader landscape of his life, it is devastating. He's still processing the trauma of his sudden dismissal from SNL. He is dealing with the lingering fear instilled by Lorne Michaels' ultimatums. He is physically exhausted from the endless cycle of rehab and relapse.
And now, the film industry is grinding him down.
That relapse after the Black Sheep premiere was so severe that he required immediate medical intervention and yet another stint in rehab before the studio would even allow him to begin filming his next contractual obligation.
Which was Beverly Hills Ninja.
From a purely cynical financial perspective, he bounces back. Beverly Hills Ninja actually opens at #1 at the box office in 1997.
But you can't hide the reality on screen. The physical toll of the narcotics, the alcohol, the yo-yoing weight fluctuations, it was becoming impossible to mask with makeup and lighting.
His body was failing.
Before we confront the final heartbreaking reality of his physical decline, we need to pause the chronological narrative for a second.
We must examine the astonishing list of projects he was attached to at the time of his death.
Looking at these unfinished works is crucial, because it reveals exactly how Hollywood viewed him and, more importantly, how he desperately wanted to change that perception.
The unfinished masterpieces. It's a graveyard of what-ifs.
We open the show with the biggest one, Shrek. He was the original choice for the title character and had recorded the vast majority of the dialogue, somewhere between 85 and 95% of the film.
When Mike Myers eventually inherited the role after Chris's death, he completely re-engineered the character, injecting that bombastic Scottish accent.
But the original animation tests with Farley's voice are floating around out there. And he played Shrek as a teenage boy trapped in a monster's body. He was humble, insecure, and incredibly sweet.
The tragedy of that specific project runs incredibly deep. Dana Carvey and David Spade revealed on their podcast that the studio approached John Farley, Chris's younger brother, who sounds remarkably similar to him, to step into the booth and finish the final 5 days of line readings. But the grief was simply too raw. John admitted he couldn't bear to stand in that booth and try to summon the ghost of his brother.
Imagine how Shrek would have altered his legacy. It would have proven to the world that he could convey complex, nuanced emotion using nothing but his voice. He wouldn't have been relying on his physical mass. He would have shown the industry his heart.
And the industry was throwing everything at him. He was slated to voice a massive brachiosaurus named Sorbus in Disney's Dinosaur, a giant creature terrified of heights, which is a perfect Farley archetype.
He was offered the role of Ishmael in the bowling comedy Kingpin, but Paramount forced him to drop out to fulfill his Black Sheep contract.
Jim Carrey's dark, manic, unsettling role in The Cable Guy was originally written with Chris Farley in mind.
The sheer variety is staggering. He was attached to a third Ghostbusters film, where a new team was going to fight the forces of overpopulation in hell.
Dav Pilkey, the author, specifically wanted him for a live-action Captain Underpants movie.
He was developing a film called The Gelfin with Vince Vaughn, and perhaps the most painful missed opportunity. Just 2 months before his death, he and David Spade were actively plotting a third buddy comedy.
They had a script titled Tree, where Spade would play a cynical White House staffer who has to team up with a bizarre truck driver played by Farley to transport the presidential Christmas tree across the country.
But hovering above all these standard Hollywood comedies is a very specific, incredibly dark thread. Historians often refer to it as the Hollywood curse, and it revolves around 3 highly specific, unmade scripts.
Farley was in talks to play the lead in an adaptation of John Kennedy Toole's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, A Confederacy of Dunces.
He wanted the role of Atukin in an adaptation of the incomparable Atuk.
And most tellingly, he was attached to star in a biographical film about the silent-era comedian Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, with a script written by the legendary David Mamet.
The curse aspect is an eerie piece of trivia. Chris Farley, John Belushi, and John Candy were all attached to these exact same 3 roles at different points in their careers.
And all 3 men died tragically before any of the films could be produced.
It is a chilling coincidence. But if we dig deeper into why these 3 men were drawn to these scripts, it tells us a lot about the archetype they were forced to inhabit.
Exactly. Look at the character of Ignatius J. Reilly in Confederacy of Dunces. He is brilliant, entirely out of place in society, physically grotesque by traditional standards, and deeply tragic.
Look at Fatty Arbuckle, one of the first massive physical comedians in Hollywood, whose career was destroyed by scandal and societal judgment regarding his size and behavior.
Belushi, Candy, and Farley were all drawn to these roles because they saw their own complex pain reflected in them. They wanted to explore the tragedy of the physically imposing outcast.
They wanted to use their art to process the societal rejection they felt. But tragically, for Farley, that desire to create meaningful art was losing out to the demands of his severe chemical dependencies as 1997 came to a close.
The documentation of his physical decline in the autumn of 1997 is incredibly painful to analyze. He filmed a guest appearance on the Nickelodeon sketch show, All That, working alongside a very young Kenan Thompson.
If you analyze the footage, the kinetic hurricane of the early 90s is completely gone. The physical comedy is virtually non-existent.
You can hear the struggle in his breathing. He is visibly exhausted just attempting to deliver the dialogue. The physical toll of the heart strain and the narcotics could no longer be masked by a loud voice or a wide smile.
His body was loudly declaring that it could not sustain the punishment. And this grim reality culminates in what has to be one of the most heartbreaking, difficult-to-watch live television broadcasts of that decade. On October 25, 1997, he returned to Studio 8H to host Saturday Night Live.
The creative decisions made for that specific episode are highly controversial in retrospect.
To say the least.
The cold open of the show leaned heavily into meta-commentary about his personal demons. It features Lorne Michaels openly doubting whether Farley is physically capable of hosting the show.
Tim Meadows is tasked with defending him, delivering lines promising that Farley is calm and that his party days are over.
They even brought in Chevy Chase to act as Farley's supposed sponsor.
It is intensely cruel to watch now. They were turning his very real lethal addiction into a punchline while he was literally dying in front of the cameras.
The behind-the-scenes reality of that broadcast was terrifying. There was genuine panic among the crew about whether he would survive the 90-minute live show.
Chris Rock came back to appear in the monologue, but reports indicate Rock was standing by in the wings, fully prepared to take over the hosting duties if Farley collapsed on stage.
When you watch the performance, the deterioration is undeniable. His voice is wrecked and hoarse, a result of exhausting himself during the dress rehearsals. His face is deeply flushed. He is gasping for air between jokes.
He managed to push through the broadcast, fueled entirely by muscle memory and pure terror, but it was a glaring siren to the world that he was in critical danger.
And less than 2 months later, the inevitable arrived. On the afternoon of December 18, 1997, Chris Farley was found dead in his apartment in the John Hancock Center in Chicago.
He was discovered by his younger brother, John. He was only 33 years old.
The autopsy results merely confirmed what the people closest to him have been dreading for years. He died from an overdose of a speedball, a lethal, highly stressful combination of cocaine and heroin.
The medical examiner also noted advanced atherosclerosis, a severe narrowing of the arteries, as a major contributing factor.
His cardiovascular system was destroyed. He had subjected his body to the stress of a professional athlete, combined with extreme obesity, and then flooded it with harsh narcotics. It simply shut down.
And here is where we must close the loop on the darkest parallel of his life. He died at the exact same age, 33 years old, and from the exact same cause, a speedball overdose, as his greatest hero, John Belushi.
It is a devastating repetition of history. The funeral took place on December 23, back where his story began, at Our Lady Queen of Peace Catholic Church in Madison, Wisconsin.
Over 500 people attended the private service. The pews were filled with the titans of comedy who had worked alongside him, who had loved his spirit, and who had spent years trying desperately to save his life.
Dan Aykroyd, Adam Sandler, Chris Rock, Rob Schneider, Lorne Michaels, John Goodman, Phil Hartman, they all made the journey.
But amidst the intense grief, the tabloids immediately seized upon a single notable absence. David Spade was not there.
The rumor mill was instantly vicious. The press started speculating that the two best friends had suffered some massive, bitter falling out, that Spade was angry with him, or that there was a deep rift.
It took years for Spade to finally address the rumors, and when he did, his explanation stripped away all the Hollywood drama and left only the raw, human reality of grief.
He stated that he did not attend simply because he could not handle it emotionally.
The pain of watching his friend, his comedic partner, be lowered into the earth was more than his heart could bear. It is a sobering reminder that behind the celebrity gossip columns, these are real human beings processing unimaginable loss.
He was interred at Resurrection Cemetery in Madison, but it is vital that our exploration of his life does not end at the grave. A performer of his magnitude leaves a shockwave that travels through the culture long after they are gone.
His memory has evolved significantly over the past decades. The industry and the public have slowly begun to recognize the profound talent that existed beneath the slapstick.
The tributes have been monumental. In 2005, he was posthumously awarded a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, cementing his permanent place in the industry's history.
His brother Tom Jr., working with writer Tanner Colby, published an authorized biography titled The Chris Farley Show, which did incredible work in stripping away the myth and revealing the sensitive, struggling human being we've discussed today.
His influence permeated music as well. The Red Hot Chili Peppers honored him in their song Purple Stain from the Californication album with the lyric, "Farley is an angel and I can prove this."
And perhaps the most poignant tribute came from Adam Sandler. In his 2018 Netflix stand-up special, 100% Fresh, Sandler stepped away from the comedy to perform a deeply sincere, emotionally shattered tribute song dedicated entirely to Farley.
He played his guitar while intimate. Behind-the-scenes footage of Chris played on a screen behind him. Sandler even brought that song back to Studio 8H when he hosted SNL in 2019, leaving the studio audience in tears.
The culture refuses to let him fade, In fact, just recently, in April 2024, it was announced that a major biographical film is entering production, starring Paul Walter Hauser, directed by Josh Gad, and overseen by Lauren Michaels.
So we have to look back at the entirety of this chaotic, brilliant, heartbreaking journey and ask, what is the ultimate truth of Chris Farley?
We have to reject the caricature. The world paid money to see a sweaty, screaming man crash through tables, but the man executing those falls was a disciplined athlete.
He was a deeply sensitive, profoundly insecure artist who utilized his own physical mass as fuel.
He literally burned himself alive to generate warmth and joy for total strangers. He gave absolutely everything he had, his dignity, his health, his life, in exchange for the laugh.
He was a man desperately trying to outrun his own shadow, utilizing comedy not just as a career, but as a survival mechanism. And that brings us all the way back to the quiet isolation of that sound booth, where a gentle voice tried to bring life to an ogre who just wanted to be loved.
Which leaves us with a lot to think about as an audience.
It really does. In our relentless, insatiable consumption of comedy and entertainment, we must confront our own complicity. Do we demand too much of the people who offer us joy?
When an artist discovers that their greatest financial currency and their only path to public affection is the destruction of their own body and soul, how do we, as the audience, separate the joy they give us from the tragedy of their existence?
It is a profound and uncomfortable question.
And it is one that will linger long after the laughter finally fades.